What's up guys? Today I've got the Sigma 50mm to 100mm f1.8 lens that I want to review for you guys today. Now, I've been a fan of Sigma lenses since before Sigma was cool. I've been shooting with them pretty much since I got into photography. They were pretty much the most economical way for me to go. I primarily use the 70 to 200 f2.8 by Sigma and the Sigma 120 to 300 for most of my sports work. But you know, obviously everybody loves their art series, and it's kind of what's made Sigma gain a lot of popularity here in the last 2 years or so. And this 50 to 100 millimeter is just another home run by Sigma. I previously tested one of the other fast aperture lenses that Sigma put out, the 24 to 35 millimeter lens, and that thing was amazing. And so I had very high expectations for this 50 to 100 millimeter lens, because it's the only zoom lens to my knowledge on the market that, other than Sigma's other two zoom lenses that do this, that shoot at an aperture faster than f2.8. The 50 to 100 shoots at f1.8, which is just incredible. But the question is how is it going to perform? The lens is only designed for APS-C camera bodies. It's not designed for full frame cameras, although you can put it on a full frame camera. You're just going to get some very, very heavy vignetting. Basically, you're going to get a dark circle around your image, but it will go on there and it will fire. I had held off trying out the Sigma 50 to 100 millimeter because I wanted to have a decent APS-C camera body to try it with. I didn't currently have one, so I am actually currently recording this video with the Canon 80D along with the Sigma 50 to 100 millimeter f1.8. And it's really cool because since it's at 1.8, it kind of helps to hide my filthy house behind me. And it also lets a ton of light in. I don't even have a single light on inside this house. I'm just sitting by a window, and I hope it's fairly well exposed, but it's awesome. So for shooting video on a tripod, it actually, I think, works fairly well. If you want to try to handhold this thing to shoot video, good luck. I tried to shoot some video at a swim meet, and also of my son playing Pokemon Go, because that is the rage these days, right, is Pokemon Go. And I absolutely could not get anything to be even remotely stable. This lens has no image stabilization, which is a big disappointment to me, because at this focal range, 50 to 100 millimeters, it's kind of a range where you begin to need image stabilization if you're going to be shooting in any kind of low light situation. You've also got to add the crop factor in there. So you're looking at a lens that is effectively about an 85 to 160 millimeters, somewhere in that range, and that's a long way to shoot and not have any kind of image stabilization, either for stills or for video. But I absolutely could not get any video whenever I was zoomed in that was even remotely stable with this lens. But like the other lenses, I'm assuming the reason why Sigma did not introduce the image stabilization into this lens is simply because it would have made the lens too heavy. This thing is already enormous. When I actually unboxed it, I thought they made a mistake and they sent me a 70 to 200 millimeter lens, because it's almost identical in size and weight to my 70 to 200 millimeter. This thing is heavy, it is not lightweight, but it's well balanced. It's got some length to it, so it feels a lot like a 70 to 200 millimeter whenever you're using it. It just doesn't quite have the same reach. One of the things that I do whenever I get a wide aperture lens is I set them up and I test them to make sure that I'm not having any kind of focusing issues, because at f1.8, when you're shooting at like 100 millimeters, your depth of field is razor thin. And if there's any kind of issue with the lens back focusing slightly or the camera body front focusing just a little bit, it can really begin to wreak havoc whenever you're shooting at f1.8. So I set up focus test, checked everything out. Everything seemed absolutely perfectly fine with this lens, and so I went out and I began shooting with it. And after about a week, what I found is that this lens just performs amazingly. I did get quite a few images that were just a little bit soft whenever I was shooting at f1.8, but those were typically with moving subjects. And I don't think it was so much an issue with the lens as I think that the camera body, the Canon 80D, was just struggling to autofocus fast enough whenever it came to moving subjects. But especially for static subjects, I mean, I was just consistently able to get tack sharp images with this lens. And for me personally, this is just an awesome focal length, because I typically shoot anywhere from about 90 millimeters to 140 millimeters. That's pretty much my go-to range whenever I do my portrait sessions and I shoot with the 70 to 200. If I look at my stats for the day, that's typically the range that I'm in. And this lens covers that range, but it gives me a 1 1/3 stop wider aperture than what my 70-200 f2.8 gives me. So that means I can shoot with a lower ISO, a faster shutter speed, whatever I need to in that particular situation, and get a even more shallow depth of field and a better image. In my opinion, this lens is a perfect focal length for people that want to shoot portraits. I could see a lot of use for this lens for event type photography if you're going to be, let's say, photographing a school assembly or a school play or something along those lines, where you're not necessarily going to need a ton of reach, but you are going to need some zoom ability, and you're going to need that wide aperture to bring in a lot of light. This lens would just be absolutely awesome for any type of event like that. I have to tell you, I mean, even though I did run into some issues with some soft images, like I said, I think that was more of a camera body issue than the lens, because I also ran into that problem with the ADD and moving subjects using other lenses. But overall, this lens just focused fairly fast. I wouldn't say that it's a blazing fast autofocus within this lens. I was kind of surprised because this lens actually made quite a bit of noise when I read autofocus, especially if it was hunting.
Put your music on.
I don't know how.
You know how.
Stop being a fibber. No, come on, Mom. Now, okay?
Okay.
But it was much louder than what I expected, because this lens has the same motor as the 24-35, which was incredibly quiet. At 50 to 100 millimeters, this lens basically has no distortion whatsoever. It does exhibit a little bit of chromatic aberration. The images from this lens were just absolutely sharp. I mean, you can take a look at some of these sample images. There's just so much eyelash detail in these. I mean, when you zoom in at beyond 1:1, it is just ridiculously sharp. And I could have got more sharp images, but I tend to shoot a lot in lower light situations, late in the afternoon or early evening, right as the sun's going down, where I may have to begin to push my ISO in certain areas to try to get a proper exposure. And if I'm having to push my ISO up because this doesn't have image stabilization, it's going to make my images a little bit softer. So for me, that's a huge disappointment to not have image stabilization in this lens, because it would just be so awesome for those kinds of low light, late afternoon desk kind of shoots. And to be able to just get a super shallow depth of field and tack sharp images would just be awesome. But unfortunately, especially when you start using APS-C camera bodies, you're not going to get the best noise performance. And I've said this many times, for me, the noise performance, I don't really care so much about the grain in the image. The issue is the loss of fine detail and the loss of sharpness that comes with the higher ISOs. I know this lens isn't a 70-200, which I still think is the most versatile lens that you could possibly have in your bag, but it's pretty close, in my opinion, for my style of shooting. It's a very close second that this lens would be the most versatile lens, and in many ways would even be more effective than a 70-200 millimeter. Because if you know you don't need that little bit of extra reach that you would get with the 70-200 millimeter, I would say hands down this lens wins in almost every way except for not having image stabilization. The price on this lens is a bargain compared to a 70-200. The image quality is great, and you get an extra 1 1/3 stop of light with this lens. Did I mention that before? So overall, this is a definite, for me personally, this is a definite must-own lens. I don't own this one. Unfortunately, I have to send it back. But I do absolutely plan on picking this lens up before the end of the year, because I would have to say this is probably my new favorite lens. So I hope that helps you guys out. If you guys have any questions about this lens or anything else, leave me a comment below. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.